Hey kitty, what's up? What's up, kitty? Time to look at the eastern part of the bracket of the 2018 CFL Playoffs. There we go, as the On the Road to the Grey Cup is on. The eastern semifinal has the BC Lions crossing over to take on the Hamilton Tiger Cats, which hence my intro about kitties, because you got the two cat teams playing off each other for a chance to head off to Ottawa for the Eastern final. The Eastern semifinal happens on Sunday, November 11th, 11 a.m. Mountain kickoff. So I'll bring up my notes here and let's break down the matchup here, and we'll see who I think is going to win and head off to Ottawa for the Eastern Final the next Sunday. So let's begin here. So first, how did we get here? Well, first the Hamilton Tiger Cats finished second in the East with an 8-10 record. As you'll clearly find out, the West Division was definitely a lot tougher than the East Division. The BC Lions had a 9-9 record, and that put them fourth in the West. And how the CFL works is that if the fourth place team has a greater record than the third place team in the other division, that team crosses over and takes that seed in the bracket. And the Montreal Alouettes finished third in the East with a 5-13 record. So clearly the BC Lions had a much greater record. And the BC Lions won the season series against the Edmonton Eskimos, taking 2 out of 3. Because the Edmonton Eskimos were 9-9 and finished fifth and last in the West, so they did not make the playoffs and got the lower seed in the division, which sparked a debate about how they should seed teams in the future, but that's debate for another time. So the other records we'll break down is that the Hamilton Tiger Cats were 4-5 at home this year, so they were just under 500 at home. But the BC Lions, despite the 9-9 record, they were 2-7 on the road. So the BC Lions are definitely dominant at home and not so on the road. And then another last record I'll throw out here is that the Hamilton Tiger Cats this season, they were 4-6 versus the Western Division, while the BC Lions were 5-3 versus the Eastern Division. I mean, the West Division was definitely a lot tougher division than the East Division. So, as I said, the winner of this team, the Feline Bowl, the Cat Bowl, or whatever you want to call it, is off to Ottawa to take on the Ottawa RedBlacks in the Eastern Final. And also, let's look at the season series here, as both BC and Hamilton played each other once at home and once on the road here. It worked out to be in back-to-back weeks here. So if you flash back to week 15, the BC Lions beat the Hamilton Tiger Cats 35-32 in overtime. Things that stood out for this game was that there was a head-scratching moment where the Hamilton Tiger Cats looked like they were in field goal range to take a 2-score lead, but June Jones didn't have confidence in his kicker, Liam Harlarau, so he went for a punt. And then the BC Lions came back and scored a touchdown, and they had to go for 2 to tie it. And this was the Brian Burnham game where he just had his toe in the end zone to tie the game, and eventually the BC Lions won at the game-winning vehicle. One of the best exciting games of the year. That happened in week 15. Both quarterbacks, actually Jonathan Jennings was playing in the season series here because Travis Lilly was hurt, but both Jeremiah Mazzoli and Jonathan Jennings threw for over 350 yards this game, so it was definitely an offensive showdown. So let's go back to week 16 here, and this was definitely a totally different football game, as the Hamilton Tiger Cats blew out the BC Lions with a 40-10 victory at Tim Hortons Field. And I'd say one factor with this game was that the BC Lions on practice, if you go look at Tim Hortons Field, they have a big Hamilton Tiger Cats logo on the center field, and the BC Lions, you know, there were Instagram posts where the BC Lions were dancing and rubbing their feet all over the logo, so that probably inspired the Hamilton Tiger Cats to play an extra spirited affair, and they definitely responded, and Brandon Banks had a big game with 2 touchdown catches, but as you'll see when I break it down here, he actually is hurt, so he won't be available that game, but let's just remember week 16, this was the logo dancing game, so I'm pretty sure the BC Lions aren't going to dance on the logo before the Eastern semifinal here. So some playoff history here, as you know, these teams actually played each other in the playoffs a couple times in the past year. Actually, in 2009, it was another Eastern semifinal game where the BC Lions crossed over and played the Hamilton Tiger Cats, and in 2009, the BC Lions beat the Hamilton Tiger Cats 34-27 in overtime. And then the other last time that the BC and Hamilton met in the playoffs, actually, you go all the way back to 1985, which was the 73rd Grey Cup in Montreal, and the BC Lions beat the Hamilton Tiger Cats 37-24. So there's a little playoff history here between the two Tiger Cats and Lions, the kitty teams or feline teams or whatever word you want to insert here. So now let's start breaking down the matchup here. And the most important position in football is quarterback. You got Jeremiah Mazzoli, who actually in the playoffs is the leading passer. Mike Riley led the league in passing in the CFL this season, but he plays for the Eskimos but not in the playoffs. So Jeremiah Mazzoli, of the 6 teams remaining in the playoff hunt here, is the leading passer. And this is versus Travis Lulay, who has had a rejuvenating season. He looks like back to the form that he was in when he won the most outstanding player in 2011 and led the BC Lions to the Grey Cup at home that year. So, I mean, given the numbers here, I would have to give the edge to Hamilton in quarterback just because of, you know, the passing yards. And, you know, BC's been between Lulay and Jennings, but Lulay's been the guy down the stretch here who led into the second half surge. So running back here, I mean, basically you got Alex Green for Hamilton and Terrell Sutton, who's been a nice pickup to boost the BC Lions running game because it was lacking in the first half of the season. And also Hamilton has John White, who has been not used as the main running back, but provides a nice depth there. So when it comes to the running game, I'm going to give the edge to Hamilton here. Now receivers here, the Hamilton Tiger Cats have gotten beaten up in receiving this year, just like the Calgary Stampeders. They've had a lot of injuries in receivers. I mean, get this. I mean, the Hamilton's definitely going to be relying on guys like Luke Taster and Mike Jones to pick up the receiving load, but Brandon Banks is injured, Bruce Williams is injured, and Jalen Saunders is injured. Those are definitely game-changing receivers there for the Hamilton Tiger Cats. But for a veteran presence, they signed Marquay McDaniel, so they do have some receivers to potentially spread the ball here, but Luke Tasker and Mike Jones will definitely be relied on the most. While the BC Lions, I mean, they are missing the Manny Show, Manuel Arsenault, but they still got Brian Burnham, who's always a deep threat, and they picked up Devere Posey, who won the Grey Cup MVP last year for the Toronto Argonauts, and he had his breakout game a couple weeks ago where he had 3 touchdowns in a quarter. That was the game where the BC Lions clinched the season series against the Edmonton Eskimos, so they also have 2 big threats there, and you know, they signed another, and the BC Lions also have another former Stampeder for a veteran presence in Anthony Parker. So when it comes to receivers in this matchup, I like the BC Lions on this one. So offensive line here, I mean, both teams are pretty good and solid at offensive line. I mean, Hamilton has Mike Filer and Brandon Raverward to highlight. Counteract that with the BC Lions of Joe Figura and Jonathan Olafoy. And I think both of these quarterbacks do a decent job or these offensive lines do a good job of protecting their respective quarterbacks. So I give no one the edge here. This is a push between the BC Lions and the Hamilton Tiger Cats. Defensive line here was definitely going to be an interesting matchup here. I mean, Hamilton has, the non-import Ted Laurent and Larry Dean had over 100 tackles this season to lead the way. But the BC Lions definitely loaded up. They got Odell Willis in the offseason, and they also acquired Sean Lemon from the Toronto Argonauts, who definitely has won a couple Grey Cups, one with Calgary and one with Toronto, and Devon Colin also is a threat. So the BC Lions, I think, definitely has the edge in defensive line here, who can potentially put pressure on Jeremiah Masoli here. So when it comes to the linebackers, the guys in the middle here, Hamilton has Don Yamba, who's a very versatile, quick defensive back who can play. He's always a threat to bring down receivers or running back. But the BC Lions, I mean, they got hard hitters like Micah Awi, and maybe, just maybe, he was just activated off the 6-game injury list, but he'd be a little rusty. Solomon Eliminian, he's a tackling machine. So looking at this matchup, I give no one the edge here in the defensive linebackers. I call this a push there too. So defensive backs here, these are the fast guys in the corners here who always cover the receivers and go after batted down passes and interceptions here. I mean, Hamilton definitely has Delvin Breaux and Carell Brooks to highlight. But the BC Lions, they have guys like Anthony Orange, TJ Leading, Winston Rose to keep opposition quarterbacks in notice. And I'll give this edge to the BC Lions here when it comes to the defensive backs. Now, the return game. This is definitely another big part of the game, and special teams here when it comes to kickoffs and punt returns and maybe a missed field goal here if it comes into play. Basically, Hamilton has Frankie Williams and BC has Chris Rainey, and clearly, if you're a CFL fan, BC definitely has the edge there with Chris Rainey. He's definitely always a threat to return one, or with this football being a field position game, Chris Rainey will definitely has the edge in terms of giving the Lions favorable field position. So the last aspect to look at is the kicking game. Hamilton has Laram Hailarahu, who is a solid kicker who can kick the winning field. I mean, he scored the winning points last year in the Grey Cup, but then BC counteracts with Ty Long, and both these guys can do both jobs here. The only knock I have on Ty Long is he has a tendency to fake getting hit, and he's been caught a couple times. But I give the edge here to BC when it comes to the kicking game. I like Ty Long over Laram Hailarahu at this stage. So, now this is the stage of the video where I'm going to say this team will win if. So, I think Hamilton will win if they outrun the BC Lions. I say if someone steps up and the receiver has a big game, and if they can contain Chris Rainey in the return game. So I think those are the three facets that I think would give Hamilton the win over the BC Lions here. The BC Lions will win if Travis Lulay outpasses Jeremiah Masoli in this game. If Terrell Sutton has a huge game on the round, outruns the Hamilton Tiger Cats, and as I was mentioning with the return game is how much favorable field position or how much of an impact Chris Rainey has. And then the last thing, now all the games are being played outside here, as I last checked on Environment Canada here. What they're forecasting in Hamilton is it'll be a cloudy day, high of 1, and a low of -1 and cloudy. So precipitation won't be a factor for this game, according to Environment Canada, as of when I made these notes and last checked the weather forecast. So we're still a few days out here, and it could change here, but I'm just going based on that. So, that leads it to the last question here. who do I think is going to win? And I'll make my pick-em style here. But I think the BC Lions are going to be off to Ottawa here, as I give them a 60% confidence here to win over the Hamilton Tiger Cats and make their way to Ottawa for the Eastern Final. I just think, they got the talented receiver and the secondary, and the return game was what I think will push the BC Lions ahead. And also, Hamilton seems to have a funny history here in the playoffs here, but that's my review of the Eastern semifinal. I'll be making a video for the Western semifinal here. But anyway, if you enjoy everything I put on my channel, make sure you hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you either at the Western semifinal video, or I'll be posting my East and West final videos next week this time, after the Western and the Eastern semifinals are in the books here, and as we get one step closer to the 106th Grey Cup in Edmonton. So, as I always say, I'll see you at the next